Welcome back, guys, to Appalachian Horror. In today's episode, I'm sharing 9 true, disturbing stories about creepy encounters in the Appalachian wilderness. One man on a solo work trip wakes up to footsteps circling his tent. No voices, no lights, just pacing. Another returns to his remote cabin to find the porch light dead, the door cracked open, and his dog refusing to come back inside. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Share this with your friends, and let me know where you're watching from. Thanks, now let's get into it. My name's Daniel, and I've been working as a substitute teacher in Southern Ohio for the past few years, which isn't exactly a career you dream about as a kid, but it keeps the bills paid. The truth is, I needed quiet. After my divorce, I couldn't stand the suburbs anymore. The constant barking dogs, the neighbors mowing at dawn, the endless stream of noise. So when I stumbled across a listing for an old hunting cabin in the foothills near Wayne National Forest, I didn't think twice. It wasn't much, a squat rectangle of dark timber with a tin roof and a chimney that coughed smoke sideways in the wind. But it sat on 5 acres of thick woods, with a creek twisting past the back and no neighbors within shouting distance. To me, it looked like salvation. The first weeks there were peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. The nights were black and absolute, no streetlights, no glow from distant cities. I'd sit on the porch after dinner, listening to the timber groan and the creek bubble, and feel something like relief. You learn fast what sounds belong to the woods. The soft skitter of possums, the wailing yip of coyotes, the occasional branch snapping when a deer passes through. I liked that rhythm. I liked knowing what was supposed to be there. That's why I noticed the light. It started on an ordinary Tuesday. I was rinsing a coffee mug when I saw a pulse of brightness sweep across the wall, like a passing headlight. Only there was no road anywhere near here. I turned to the front window and saw my porch lantern blinking on and off. Not flickering, pulsing, steady and deliberate. On then off. On then off. I'd replaced the bulb myself the day I moved in, so it wasn't old. The lantern wasn't even wired into the house. It ran on its own small solar panel. No reason for it to act like that. I stepped outside and tapped the fixture. It stayed lit. I unplugged the battery, snapped it back in. Darkness, then light again, without me touching a thing. And just before I went back inside, I saw it. A shape scuttling low across the edge of the clearing, too fast and too awkward to be a person, too big to be a raccoon. The woods closed behind it with a silence, so heavy it made my teeth ache. I told myself it was nothing. Coyotes. Shadows. A trick of the eyes. But 2 nights later, something woke me at exactly 1:47 a.m. A tap 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 against my window. At first, half asleep, I thought it might be a tree branch in the wind. But the rhythm was wrong. Precise. 2 seconds between each rap, like the ticking of a warped clock. I froze in bed, listening to my pulse hammer louder than the sound itself. When it didn't stop, I forced myself up and yanked the curtain. Nothing but black. Still, I flipped on the porch floodlight. And that's when I saw them. 3 stones, carefully stacked in the dead center of the yard. They hadn't been there when I came in that night. I was sure of it. The stack was small, maybe knee-high, but perfect, balanced in a way that didn't feel accidental. I threw on my boots, marched out, and kicked it over. The rocks scattered with a clatter that seemed too loud in the stillness. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, half expecting to catch someone crouched there. But the woods swallowed the beam. No breath of wind, no animal rustle. Just silence. For days after, I tried to laugh it off. Kids, maybe. Though what kids would hike miles into the forest just to mess with me, I couldn't say. But then came the figure. It was late, almost 3 a.m., when I pulled into the clearing after a long day. I let the engine idle a second, headlights cutting across the trees, when I saw him. A man, tall and thin, standing just inside the tree-line. His arms hung too long, and there was something slung across his back. A sack, maybe, or a bundle of tools. He didn't move when my truck light caught him. Didn't flinch when I shut the engine off. Just stood there watching. "Hey!" I called, forcing more anger than I felt. "You lost?" No answer. I opened the door and slammed it hard. That should have startled him. Instead, he took one slow step back, disappearing behind the first row of pines like he'd been swallowed. I stood there for a long minute, listening. Nothing. Finally, I went inside, every lock thrown, shotgun laid across my lap as I sat staring at the door until dawn. The next day, I bought 3 trail cameras in town. I mounted them around the clearing, one on the porch, one at the tree line, one facing the creek. That night, the motion sensors tripped over and over, buzzing my phone until I silenced it. When I checked the SD cards the next morning, every clip showed nothing. No raccoon, no branches shifting, just empty frames, until one recording. It was audio only, a whisper, faint and strained, like breath slipping through teeth. One word, inside. I nearly dropped my phone. From then on, I stayed at a friend's place more often than home. But the cabin had its hooks in me. I couldn't just leave it. So I went back, and the next time there were handprints. They smeared across the glass of the front door in streaks of pale dirt. 4 fingers each. No thumbs. As if something had pressed against the glass and dragged downward. In the back room, on the floor by the sliding door, someone had arranged twigs into a pattern. 2 circles with a line running through them. Some kind of symbol. I burned it in a bucket, my hands shaking as the sticks curled and snapped. That night, the cameras caught her. A woman, barefoot, hair dangling down past her face like a curtain, standing motionless at my door. She tilted her head back until her neck bent at a sickening angle, then snapped it forward like a marionette. Her eyes reflected the camera's infrared glow, huge, unblinking. Her mouth moved soundlessly, opening wider than it should. Then she walked backward, retreating into the woods without ever turning around. The next morning, I found footprints in the damp soil. Bare feet, deep and fresh, leading straight from the porch to the trees. That's when I boarded the windows. I cut sheets of plywood, bolted them tight, leaving only slivers for light. I told myself it would keep me safe. But at 4:08 a.m. 3 nights later, every camera went dark at once. Not disconnected, not drained, just dead, like someone had flipped a switch. And then the knocking began. Not at the door. On the wall, just feet behind me as I sat on the couch clutching the shotgun. A slow, deliberate thud. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see what might be there. Instead, I unlocked the door, stepped outside, and walked down the dirt road. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I drove to a gas station 15 miles away and slept in the cab of my truck. When I returned days later, the cabin was untouched. The windows still boarded, the porch swept clean by rain. The cameras worked fine, batteries full. I ripped them down and sold them in town. It's been quiet since, but I don't sleep in darkness anymore. I keep a lantern burning, because I know the stories now. The locals call them the hollow ones. People who vanish in those woods don't stay gone. They come back hollow, voices stripped, eyes full of black light. They want company, and I think they know my name. My name is Rachel. I'm 34 and work as a field archivist for a small university in Kentucky. Most of my time is spent digitizing forgotten records, land deeds, old tax ledgers, brittle maps that crumble if you breathe on them wrong. I like the work, though it eats your eyes and leaves your spine knotted from sitting over a scanner 10 hours at a stretch. After last winter's endless backlog, my department chair all but forced me to take leave. I hadn't planned on going anywhere, but my cousin Mark called when he heard. He owned a disused trapper's shack up near Cranberry Glades in West Virginia, a place he used during elk season before a storm washed out part of the road. He hadn't been back in years, said the place gave him bad air now. He offered me the key anyway, told me it might do me good to breathe mountain silence instead of dust from courthouse basements. I told myself it would be a short stay, 2 weeks tops. Enough to clear my head, maybe sketch some landscapes like I used to before work consumed everything. The trail up to the shack wasn't much of a trail anymore. I left my car by a rusted cattle gate and dragged my gear along a path of half-eroded ruts, wet leaves plastering the ground like a soggy quilt. The forest felt tight, as if the trees had been leaning inward year after year to hide whatever lay inside. The shack itself sat hunched on a slope above a creek, boards gray with rot, tin roof buckled in places, porch sagging like a tired back. Before stepping up, I felt my knees go weak in that instinctual way your body sometimes reacts before your mind can name why. The air smelled damp, metallic, wrong. Inside it was bare bones, iron stove, a cot with a mattress gone soft in the middle, wallpaper peeling in sheets like molting skin. In the corner, stacked in a warped wooden trunk, were dozens of cassettes, their labels long faded. No order, no cases, just jumbled. I didn't even have a player, so I shoved the lid closed and focused on sweeping mouse droppings out of corners. The first days passed uneventfully. I hiked ridge trails, read by kerosene lamp, and wrote postcards I never sent. Nights were so quiet, they pressed against my eardrums. No sirens, no distant hum of highways. At first it felt like peace. Then it started to feel like being buried alive. The first disturbance came on the 7th night. I woke without reason, eyes snapping open at 2:58 a.m. The shack was silent, my breath loud in the stillness. Then came the noise, a deep, deliberate thump on the porch. Not a scuffle, not a branch falling, but weight dropped with intent. My heart stuttered, and I lay frozen, blankets to my chin. Nothing followed. The next night, again, though this time at 3:06. Same single thump, as if something wanted me awake, but not running. By the third night, I had given up on sleep. I sat in the chair facing the door, lantern low, notebook on my lap. At 3:12, the boards creaked beneath 2 measured steps. Then silence. My chest buzzed with static, like I was staring at something invisible but massive pressing in. I didn't move until dawn. The following morning, mud around the porch caught my eye. Bare footprints. Long, narrow, with toes stretched too far apart, like an imitation of human feet by something that had never actually seen them. They climbed the steps and then veered back toward the treeline. My prints, small and neat beside them, looked like toys in comparison. I photographed them and sent them to an old colleague who tracks wildlife for the state. His reply came fast. These are fabricated. Probably some prank, rubber molds or dragging with a stick. But I knew better. No prankster had been up here in years. And the prints were too precise. Not clumsy. Not random. Deliberate. That night, I found something worse. Against the back wall, just below my bedroom window, 2 dark smears ran downward, oily, almost tar-like, with finger-long streaks ending in sharp points. They glistened as though wet, though the air was dry. I scrubbed them off with steel wool until the wood beneath blistered. On day 12, I found a small trail camera in a rusted tin by the shed. Half expecting it not to work, I strapped it above the porch steps. The following morning, there was one clip saved. It showed the empty clearing for 10 seconds. Then, at the top left corner, something slid between trees. Not walking, not striding, sliding sideways, unnervingly smooth. Its height was wrong, elongated, shoulders narrow, limbs too long. Before the lens could capture more, the feed cut to static though the batteries were still full. I left the lantern burning the next night. At 3:09 the thud came again, but not from the porch. From the bedroom wall. 2 hits, slow, deliberate. Then came a dragging, like wet cloth pulled across wood. When dawn finally peeled the shadows back, I checked the siding. New streaks. Longer this time. I phoned my cousin Mark, voice cracking. He was quiet for a long while before admitting the truth. He'd stopped going after something watched him one morning. He'd been dressing a deer when he felt eyes on him. At first he thought it was a man, but it was too tall, head brushing branches, limbs angled like broken furniture. He dropped everything and drove off, never returned. What did it look like? I asked. His answer chilled me more than the silence. Don't try to see it. If it knows you see, it comes closer. I packed immediately. Threw clothes in bags, hauled them down the trail with my arms trembling. I didn't lock the shack. Didn't look back at the clearing. By dusk, I was halfway to the state highway, white-knuckling the steering wheel. 2 weeks later, Mark told me he'd sold the property in cash to a man from out west. No listing. No questions asked. We haven't spoken of it since. But even back in my apartment, I wake each night around 3:12. No porch now, no forest pressing close. Just silence. And sometimes, against the far wall of my room, a soft thump. As though the mountain has followed me, waiting for me to finally look straight at it. I wasn't the type to run from my problems, but last November I realized I couldn't outwork insomnia. The city never quieted, and every time I thought I'd drift off, some noise, sirens, neighbors slamming doors, the garbage truck, would jolt me back awake. I was a high school history teacher, worn thin from grading until dawn, and teaching with a voice that kept breaking mid-lecture. My doctor said I needed a full reset, not pills, not meditation apps, but real stillness. A friend mentioned a rental tucked away in the Unaka Mountains. near a dwindling Appalachian community called Bells Fork, Tennessee. Hardly more than a gas station, a post office, and a few homes scattered along a state road that faded into gravel. That's what hooked me. No one I knew, nothing demanding my time. Just me, my aging golden retriever Daisy, and the hope that silence could stitch me back together. The cabin was what people like to call rustic, which is another way of saying patched together by different hands over different decades. The porch leaned like a tired old man, and the cedar siding was gray with mildew. A single wood stove served as the heart of the place, and an enamel clawfoot tub sat slanted enough that water puddled on one end. But the real selling point was the forest. The oaks and poplars pressed so close you couldn't see a horizon in any direction, only trunks stacked against each other like prison bars. The nearest house, the woman who handed me the keys said, was down the ridge a piece. But she didn't give a distance, only a shrug. I liked that. Being unaccounted for was part of the plan. The first week passed the way I imagined. Daisy trotted the trails with me, tail high, sniffing until her snout was brown with leaf mold. I read old books from the cabin's single shelf, brewed coffee in a dented percolator, and watched sunrises through the crooked blinds. For once I was grateful for patchy cell service, no lesson plans, no parents calling about grades, no friends dragging me to bars. My shoulders dropped an inch. My jaw unclenched. I thought maybe I could actually start over. Then came the first knock. It was a Wednesday night. I just rinsed the dishes when 3 measured raps echoed from the front door. Not hurried, not timid, but deliberate. Daisy's ears twitched, but she didn't bark. She simply raised her head from the rug as if recognizing a routine. That detail unsettled me more than the sound itself. I set the plate down, crossed to the door, and checked the peephole. Darkness. I hesitated, thinking maybe a neighbor had stopped by late. But no one in Bells Fork knew me, and I hadn't told anyone where I was. The gravel drive would have crunched if a car had pulled up, and the porch steps should have groaned under weight. Nothing. Just those knocks reverberating in my chest long after they stopped. I bolted the lock and backed away. The following morning I convinced myself it had been the wind. Branches hitting the siding, maybe a raccoon climbing. Except branches don't knock 3 times in rhythm. That thought gnawed at me as I took Daisy down the trail, scanning for footprints, anything disturbed. The earth was undisturbed except for her paw prints and my boots. The air felt too still, too staged. By the time I returned to the cabin, I had half convinced myself I was overtired and imagining patterns where there weren't any. But patterns have a way of proving themselves. 2 nights later it happened again, this time from the rear wall, the side with no porch, no path, nothing but unbroken trees. Daisy sat rigid at attention, eyes locked on the kitchen wall where the sound came from. I forced myself to open the back door with a flashlight, the beam slicing through trunks. The silence was absolute, like the woods were holding their breath. I stood there until the cold raised goosebumps on my arms, but no one appeared. When I went back inside, I wedged a chair against the door and left every light on until dawn. That should have been enough for me to pack up. But stubbornness runs in my family, and I told myself fear was just another bad habit to unlearn. I lasted until Sunday. Around 1 a.m., the front door's lock clicked open. I know the sound, metal sliding free, and it's not something that happens by accident. The handle didn't turn all the way, just enough to rattle loose. I'd locked it like I always did. Muscle memory. I shoved a broomstick through the handle and dragged the dresser in front of it, but sleep wouldn't come after that. Every creak of the old beams felt like someone shifting their weight outside. The next day in town, I mentioned the knocks to the man at the gas station counter. He was in his 60s, thin as a fence post, with hands blackened by oil. He gave me a glance that was more warning than sympathy. "Some places up there don't like being lived in," he muttered. When I pressed him, he only said, "People in Bells Fork used to leave offerings in the woods. Cornmeal, tobacco. You stay, you'll hear why." His eyes cut to Daisy, then back to me. "Dogs know first." I laughed awkwardly, but his seriousness stuck like a burr. That night, I woke at 3 o'clock to Daisy growling low in her throat. She was perched at the foot of the bed, gaze fixed on the window above me. I rolled over and froze. A figure stood at the treeling, tall still, leaning forward as if studying the cabin. The darkness was too complete to make out features, just an outline darker than the woods themselves. I reached for the flashlight and snapped it on. The beam cut across empty trunks. The figure was gone. Daisy's growl didn't stop for another 5 minutes. From then on, everything escalated. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps crunching the gravel around the cabin but never fading, as if circling without retreating. Other times a voice would murmur from the trees, too faint to catch words, but carrying a strange cadence, like a lullaby without melody. Once, when I opened the front door to look, a plank lay across the steps. It had been pried from the back deck, nails bent outward as if by brute force. That made no sense. No one had tools. No one should have had time without me hearing. But there it was. The most chilling moment came 3 nights before I left. I had dozed off in the armchair by the stove, Daisy beside me. A thud rattled the back wall, followed by another. I stood, heart hammering, and listened. Then came a voice, clear and close. "Let me in." Calm, almost gentle, as though whoever it was thought politeness might sway me. My skin went clammy. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The voice didn't repeat. Instead, the porch light flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. The darkness that followed felt physical, like something pressing in against the cabin walls. I called the county sheriff at dawn. A deputy arrived late morning, young and dismissive, boots too clean for back roads. I showed him the ripped deck board, the drag marks and the dirt stretching toward the trees. He frowned but offered no explanation. "Maybe kids messing around," he said, though there were no kids in Bell's Fork. His only advice, by cameras, keep the doors locked. He left me with more unease than relief. That was the last straw. I threw everything into my truck, barely folding clothes, and drove until the mountains shrank in the rear view. Daisy slept hard the whole way, her paws twitching like she was still running. I didn't stop until I reached a motel 2 counties over. That night, I finally slept, though uneasily, and when I dreamed it was of knocking, 3 slow raps echoing against my skull. Months have passed, yet sometimes at night, even back in the city, I'll wake to Daisy growling toward the door. I remind myself it's impossible, that whatever belonged to those woods stayed there. But deep down I know the man at the gas station hadn't been warning me about superstition. Bell's Fork has its rules. Some places never wanted settlers. They don't like being claimed. And if you're foolish enough to try, they'll remind you the mountains were never truly empty. They were waiting. I was 32 when I decided to get out of the city for a while. Too many restless nights, too many cracked ceilings staring back at me when I couldn't sleep. I'd been working construction jobs on and off since high school, mostly in Pittsburgh, and I'd fallen into the habit of chasing projects that felt temporary. Fix a kitchen here, replace a roof there. Always other people's homes, never my own. I told myself I was saving money, but really I was drifting. So when a cousin told me about an old family property sitting abandoned on the Tennessee, North Carolina border, I figured I'd put my skills to use on something that might mean more. It wasn't about flipping the place for profit. I told myself it was about grounding, about putting my hands into wood and stone, and maybe, for once, leaving something better than I found it. The cabin was near a forgotten logging town called Perch Creek. If you looked for it on a map, it barely existed, just a handful of crooked streets, a fire station that hadn't answered calls in a decade, and a diner where the coffee tasted like iron. The cabin sat up the ridge, an hour's drive along a dirt road that looked like it hadn't been graded since Eisenhower was president. When I finally pulled my truck into the clearing, I understood why no one else in the family had bothered. The porch sagged like a tired face, half the shingles were missing, and ivy had crawled up the stone chimney like it wanted to choke it to death. But underneath the rot, I could see bones. Good timber, tight joinery, a place worth saving. It didn't take long to settle into a routine. I'd wake up with the first thin line of dawn bleeding through the warped shutters, brew coffee on a propane stove, and then lose myself in repairs, patching the roof, replacing boards, coaxing the old fireplace back to life. My dog, a shepherd mix named June, kept me company. She was old but steady, with that protective instinct you learn to trust. If she was calm, I was calm. For the first few nights, she was calm. And so was I. The silence was thicker than city silence. No car horns, no late-night fights, no humming refrigerator, but it felt right. Like my nervous system was finally unclenching. It was on the 5th night that the stillness changed. I had turned in early, muscles sore from tearing out rotted beams. when I woke to the distinct sound of someone walking across the porch. Slow steps. Heavy. June's ears pricked up and she gave a low growl, her hackles bristling. I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun, crept to the door and listened. 3 deliberate knocks followed. Not loud but steady, measured, like someone testing the wood for strength. I froze. The porch light outside was busted, so I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing but blackness. When I opened the door, the steps were bare. The dirt drive showed no tracks. The night air smelled sharp, metallic, like wet rust. I stayed awake until dawn, too alert to sleep. I told myself it was my imagination, but the knocks came again 2 nights later. This time at the back of the cabin, against a wall with no porch, no steps, nothing but forest pressing in close. June stood stiff at the kitchen door, staring at the wood like she expected it to give way. I shined my light out into the trees, but the beam only caught a tangle of branches. Nothing moved. The silence was total, and it felt deliberate, like the forest was holding its breath. I started locking up harder after that, sliding bolts, nails in the window sashes, chairs wedged under doorknobs. I'd laugh at myself while I did it, but the laugh never lasted. The strangest thing happened about a week later. I came back from hauling scrap wood to the dump in town, and every curtain in the cabin was opened. Not flung, not torn, just neatly pulled aside. I knew I'd shut them. June had been inside the whole time, and she wasn't rattled, but she sat in the middle of the living room like she'd been waiting for me. I closed the curtains again, checked every room twice, and tried to work. But from then on, it was like the house had moods. Lights dimmed even with the generator running. Doors I knew I'd latched ended up ajar. The smell of iron would creep in, clinging to the back of my throat, fading as quickly as it came. At first I thought it was the plumbing, old pipes bleeding rust, but I hadn't hooked any water up yet. The locals weren't helpful. I asked about the cabin at the diner, casually, over pie. The old man behind the counter gave me a long look and said, "That place has got a way of opening things. Curtains, doors, people. You might not want to stay too long." He didn't explain. When I pressed him, he shook his head and poured more coffee. An older woman who overheard muttered something about window children, but wouldn't say more. I tried to laugh it off, but the words stuck. That night, I understood. I woke to June barking at the upstairs window. When I looked, I saw a face reflected in the glass. Not outside, inside. A child's face, pale, pressed against the pane as though staring out into the woods. The instant I turned on my flashlight, the reflection was gone. June whimpered, something she almost never did. My stomach dropped cold. I went room to room, checking, but there was no one. The glass showed smudges, though prints too small to be mine. I barely slept after that. For 3 nights, I sat in a chair by the stove, shotgun across my lap, listening. Once around 2 a.m., I heard the front door latch click open on its own. I had nailed it shut. The nails were still there, bent outward like something had forced them. Another night, the guest room light switched on. I hadn't wired electricity to that side yet. The bulb glowed anyway. When I pulled the chain, it went dark, and I noticed marks on the window. 5 prints, smeared across the glass, as if something had been pushing to get out, not in. By the second week, the house wasn't just unsettling, it was alive. Every night, something shifted. Thuds against the walls, scraping under the floorboards. Once, a soft voice outside, almost singing. June growled low, and the sound stopped immediately, like it had been listening for her reaction. My breaking point came when I found the basement door unlocked. I hadn't gone down there yet. The smell that poured out was damp earth and mold, but beneath it was that metallic tang again. I went down with my flashlight. The floor was dirt, uneven, and in the center was a patch that looked wrong. Too smooth, too flat, like it had been packed deliberately. I pushed the dirt aside with a crowbar. My light caught on a glass jar half buried. Inside was a clump of dark hair and something that looked like teeth. I dropped it, ball rising in my throat. That's when June started barking upstairs, frantic, the kind of bark that means danger. I sprinted up, shotgun in hand, but when I reached the main floor, the barking cut off. June was standing rigid in the middle of the living room, staring at the window. And there, just outside the glass, was a hand. Small, pressed flat. Then it slid upward, smearing against the pane, before disappearing into the night. I didn't stay another night. I packed what I could into the truck, left the rest, and drove until the road straightened out and the trees thinned. I sold the cabin cheap to a man from Knoxville who didn't ask questions. I never went back. Sometimes, though, when the night is especially quiet, I'll wake with the sense that curtains have been pulled back in my apartment. I'll check, and they're always shut. But June will be staring at the glass, ears forward, waiting. I tell myself it's nothing. Just memory. Just nerves. But every once in a while, I catch the faint smell of iron in the air, sharp and unmistakable, and I remember what the woman in the diner said about window children, about how once they've seen you, they don't forget. My name is Nathan Price, I'm 46, and for most of my life I worked as a forest surveyor. When I retired early, I thought I'd earned a few years of quiet before my knees gave out completely. So I bought myself a small homestead in the Clinch Mountains of southwest Virginia, where the roads taper into gravel and the signal on your phone dies somewhere before the last mailbox. My neighbors, if you can call them that, lived 5 miles down a twisting trail. They didn't wave much, and I liked it that way. The silence suited me. It was a relief not to hear compressors, diesel engines, or two-way radios crackling about timber contracts. Just cicadas, wind through the leaves, and the occasional fox screaming at night. But one week in October, that silence turned into something else. It began on a Tuesday evening, just as the sun slipped behind the ridges. The air had that brittle bite it gets when the season shifts, crisp and hollow in the lungs. I sat on my porch with a chipped enamel mug, sipping bourbon, when the atmosphere pressed in strangely. Nothing obvious changed, but my chest tightened like I'd forgotten how to breathe. The woods sounded the same, crickets, branches moving, owls calling, but underneath it all was an absence. Like a background hum had stopped. I told myself I was imagining it, maybe winding down from a long day. I locked up, doused the lantern, and went to bed. Just after midnight I woke, not fully alert, but in that foggy space where the body twitches at things the mind hasn't yet processed. A sound tugged me awake. Scraping. Slow and uneven, just outside the front door. Not claws, not nails on wood. It was deliberate. A dragging sort of scrape, like someone idly tracing the grain with a stick. June, my old hound, sat up on her cot, ears stiff, but she didn't bark. She only whined low, like she recognized the sound and wanted no part of it. I lay there with the blanket pulled tight, whispering to myself, "Raccoon, just a raccoon." Though I knew damn well raccoons don't sound like that. Then a voice carried through the cracks in the doorframe. Rough, rasping, almost like breath had to fight its way through. Give me back what's mine." I went rigid. The voice wasn't angry, it was calm, patient. That made it worse. The words churned something in me, a memory I'd half buried. My grandfather had told me stories by firelight when I was a boy. He'd whisper about a thing in the mountains called the Longtooth, a shadow that haunted families who took what didn't belong to them. If you stole from the woods, timber, game, relics, you had to pay it back, or the Longtooth would come scratching at your doors, whispering through the cracks until you either returned it or left for good. I'd laughed at those tales when I was younger, chalking them up to folk warnings against poaching or trespassing. But in the dark that night, every word rushed back. The scraping stopped. My chest heaved with shallow breath. Finally, I forced myself up, grabbed the Winchester from beside the dresser, and crept to the door. I listened for a full minute. The forest was dead silent. I swung the door open in one sharp motion, barrel raised. Nothing but moonlit trees and a dirt trail. The porch boards creaked under my weight. No footprints. No movement. But when I turned back toward the cabin, my stomach dropped. Across the pine floorboards, faint but unmistakable, were muddy tracks. Human-shaped, barefoot. The toes were too long, the arches wrong, like someone had stretched them unnaturally. They began at the doorway and walked in a straight line across the living room. They ended at the side of my bed where I'd just been lying. No return trail. Just stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the armchair with every lantern blazing, rifle across my lap, eyes fixed on the hallway until the light of dawn crept in pale and cold. The next evening, I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion. The isolation. Too many ghost stories rattling loose in my head. But around midnight the scratching returned, this time at the window near the kitchen. June growled low, but stayed frozen on her cot. I couldn't make myself look. I just sat there, staring at the stove, pulse racing while the sound dragged along the glass. Then the voice whispered again, closer, clearer. "You took it, Nate. Give me back what's mine." Hearing my name nearly buckled me. I'd never told anyone in these hills who I was, not my full name. My neighbors barely knew I existed. But that voice did. The following morning, hollow-eyed, I drove into Perch Creek and marched into the sheriff's office. Sheriff Mathers was kind enough, but I saw the flicker in his expression. That subtle tightening around the eyes people get when they think you're unspooling. He asked how long I'd been living alone. Told me isolation could play tricks on a man. Suggested maybe I should see Pastor Riley or the county counselor. I left his office with more dread than when I'd walked in. Instead of going home, I drove to the town library, a cramped, one-room place tucked behind the post office. I combed through a shelf of brittle, uncirculated books on mountain lore. I found it after an hour, a section on something called the Borrower of the Clinch. The description made my hands shake. A spirit of the ridge, it said, bound to old-growth trees and rock hollows. If a hunter or settler ever took part of it, hair, bone, tooth, tail, it would follow. Scratching, whispering, always asking. It never left until what was stolen was returned to the earth. That memory from years ago struck me like lightning. I'd been surveying timber above the Powell River. One night I'd tracked a shape in the brush. Not deer, not cat. Bigger, heavier, low to the ground. I fired, certain I'd bagged something unusual. When I searched, there was no body, just a tail, thick and bristled with coarse black fur. It smelled like rotten copper. I'd wrapped it in burlap and stashed it in an old trunk, treating it like a hunting trophy too strange to brag about. I hadn't thought of it in a decade. Until now. That night, back at the cabin, I climbed into the attic. The trunk sat beneath moth-eaten quilts. My hands trembled as I unwrapped the burlap. The tail was still there, still damp, still reeking faintly of decay, as though it hadn't aged a day. The fur bristled at my touch. For a moment, I thought it twitched. I almost dropped it, but I held on while burning the back of my throat. Before dawn, I hiked into the forest with June at my side. We reached a lightning-blasted oak, hollow and massive. I laid the tail at its roots, stepped back, and muttered hoarsely, "I'm sorry. Take it back." Then I turned and walked without looking behind me. For a few days, things were quiet. I almost believed it was over. But silence has layers, and I began to notice again that something was missing beneath it. The insects didn't sing as they used to. Birds cut their calls short when I stepped outside. June never relaxed, her ears pricked constantly. The final night, I woke at 3 a.m. with the sense of being watched. My lantern was still burning, faint, casting amber across the room. At the foot of my bed stood a figure. Tall, skeletal, its arms too long, fingers brushing the floorboards. Its head was half shadow, half fur, its mouth opening in a stretch too wide to belong to anything human. In its hand dangled the tail. Not severed anymore, but attached, whole, twitching. It leaned forward, and in that same patient whisper said, "You remembered, but you kept it too long." I bolted upright, rifle in hand, but the figure was gone. June was cowering in the corner, tail between her legs. The cabin smelled thick of rust and rot. By sunrise, I'd packed what I could fit in the truck. I left the rest. I haven't gone back. Even now, in a cramped apartment in Roanoke, I sometimes wake at night with the same smell in the air, iron, damp fur, copper on my tongue. My curtains drawn neatly back, though I never open them. June stares at the glass with her ears pinned, waiting. And sometimes, when the city quiets enough, I hear it under the hum of the fridge, under the cars on the highway. The whisper, patient and calm as ever. Still mine. My name's Daniel Mercer, 41 years old, and after burning out as an ER nurse, I thought the best thing I could do was disappear into the mountains for a while. I wasn't chasing adventure, and it wasn't about saving money either. I needed a kind of quiet I'd never had before. Hospitals teach you to tune out noise, alarms screaming, patients wailing, staff barking orders. But after 20 years, I realized I hadn't known what real silence sounded like in decades. So I started looking for cheap places in the Appalachian backcountry, and that's how I found a small house near a place called Elk Tor, Virginia. Elk Tor doesn't really exist on paper. If you put it in your GPS, the signal cuts out somewhere between two ridgelines, and the only way you'd know you were near is when the dirt road narrows so much that the branches slap your truck like they're trying to turn you back. The house itself had been sitting empty since the 70s, 2 bedrooms, bad plumbing, paint stripped by weather. It leaned a little like it was tired of standing, but it was cheap and far away from everything. A creek ran behind it, swollen with snow melt in winter. The nearest neighbor was about half a mile down through the woods, but even that felt like an ocean away. For the first few weeks I thought I'd made the right choice. Days were simple, patching leaks, stacking firewood, trying my hand at bread in a wood stove. Nights, I'd sit on the porch bundled in layers, sipping coffee gone lukewarm, listening to the forest breathe. The quiet was thick but never heavy. It felt like the kind of stillness you could live inside. Until February. The first strange thing happened after midnight on a Tuesday. I woke to the faint creak of the screen door. Not a slam, not rattling wind, just a slow, careful hinge groan like someone easing it open with caution. The porch sat 5 feet off the ground, and the steps leading up were old pine boards that screamed with every ounce of pressure. But I hadn't heard them. I froze in bed, listening. The knob turned next, slow, deliberate, like fingers testing whether it would give. That door stuck so badly I had to shoulder it open in the daytime. Whoever was trying it wasn't forcing anything, just feeling. Then silence. I slipped out of bed, grabbed the hammer I kept under the chair, and pressed myself against the wall beside the door. I waited. No knock, no steps moving away. When I pulled the curtain just enough to peek, the porch was empty. The snow was fresh, untouched. Not even a rabbit track. By morning, I could have convinced myself it was nothing, dream residue, maybe wind. Except the latch was hanging loose, and I knew I hadn't left it like that. 3 nights later, it happened again. Same creak, same slow twist of the knob. This time I yanked the door open as soon as I heard it. Cold air slapped me, empty woods in every direction. No footprints in the snow, no movement in the trees. But the smell that clung to the hallway afterward was new, sharp, metallic, coppery, like blood left too long on steel. It burned my throat until I gagged. By dawn it was gone. I started locking my bedroom door at night after that. Then came the knocking. Not on the front door, but on my bedroom window. Soft, deliberate knocks, 3 in a row, like someone signaling. The window sat 6 feet off the ground with nothing below it. I told myself it was tree branches until I got up and looked. Outside, nothing but snow. On the glass, though, were prints. Not child-sized, not adult either. Elongated wrong. Fingers too long, palms too narrow. They smeared outward as though whatever made them had been pressing hard against the pane, staring in. I didn't touch the glass. I couldn't. The days after that felt thick, like air before a storm. I caught myself glancing at the tree line more often than I wanted. One afternoon, behind the shed, I found a stack of squirrels. 6 of them, laid out in a perfect little pyramid, eyes open, bodies stiff but unbroken. No blood, no wounds, just death arranged like it meant something. I burned them in an oil barrel until their fur turned to ash. The smoke smelled too sweet. That night the knocking spread. Not just the window, the walls. A scatter of taps, left side, then the back, then near the kitchen. Almost like someone circling, looking for the right way in. Then, faint but clear, laughter. If you could call it laughter. It sounded like someone who had heard people laugh and was trying to copy it, but didn't quite know how. Wet, gargled, choking. It broke off halfway like the sound got stuck in its throat. I snapped. I stormed onto the porch with the hammer, shouting into the trees. "Come on then, show yourself." My voice bounced off the ridge and came back hollow. Nothing answered. The next day I drove into town and bought a set of solar-powered cameras, cheap ones, motion-activated. I set them up, one on the porch, one at the shed, one facing the bedroom window. It felt paranoid, but I needed proof. Something to either make sense of it or prove I'd lost it. The woods went still that night, like they were waiting. For the first time in weeks, nothing happened. No creak, no knob, no knock. I almost let myself relax. The night after, though, a new sound came. It dropped down the chimney. Not wind, not a draft. A thump, solid and heavy, like something large had slipped inside the flue. I sprinted to the fireplace. No soot scattered, no blockage, just that smell again, copper and rot, so strong it filled the house. I opened the damper to check, but there was nothing. That was the night I called my cousin in Roanoke. I didn't explain. I just said, "I'm coming to stay for a while." I packed a single bag and drove out before sunset. I didn't lock the door, 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed with an alert from one of the cameras. I ignored it for hours, sick to my stomach, until I couldn't anymore. It was the porch cam. Time-stamped 1:22 a.m. The video showed the screen door easing open. No hand visible, no figure, just the door swinging in slow motion. Then, behind the camera, something laughed. Clearer this time, sharper. The sound cut off halfway through, like someone choking it back. The door closed again, steady as if guided. The motion sensor cut the feed. I should have deleted it right there. Instead, I replayed it over and over, letting the unease sink deeper. And then I remembered something. My second week at the cabin, an old man at the feed store had tried to chat while I bought propane. He'd asked where I was staying, and when I told him Elk Tor, his expression changed. He said, "Careful up there." Ridge folk used to whisper about the hollow caller. Likes empty houses, likes lonely people. Starts with your doors, then your windows. If you don't answer, it laughs. If you do, it comes inside. He'd grin, toothless, like it was a joke. But I think he was warning me. I never went back to Elk Tor. Sold the place sight unseen to a man from D.C. who wanted a writer's retreat. I don't know if he stayed. But here's the part one don't tell anyone, not even my cousin. Some nights, even now, I wake in my apartment to the faint sound of a screen door easing open. I don't have a screen door. I don't even have a porch. Still I hear it, metal hinges straining with groaning, then silence. And once, just once, I swore I saw the bedroom curtain shift, though the window was sealed tight. That sour, copper smell followed after. Thin at first, then strong enough to sting my nose. I lay awake until dawn with the taste of rust on my tongue. I think the hollow caller doesn't care where I go. Maybe it never cared about the house at all. Maybe it only wanted me. I'm 33, and my name is Claire Bennett. For the last decade, I've worked as an adjunct history professor in Richmond, scraping by on short contracts and caffeine. By last winter, I'd burned myself down to a husk. Students stopped showing up, my department head forgot to renew my hours, and I found myself staring at ceilings for whole days without moving. So when an old family friend said he still had a hunting cabin in the Monongahela National Forest up in West Virginia, and that I could stay as long as I wanted, I jumped on it. I told everyone it was about writing, that I'd use the time to finally finish my book on Appalachian folklore. But deep down, I was just running. I needed somewhere quiet enough that I could hear my own thoughts without the static of the city chewing them up. The cabin was off a gravel road, so narrow I thought my tires would slip into the trees. It sat in a small clearing, the kind where the pines closed so tight overhead you couldn't see the stars unless you stepped a good distance away. The place leaned to one side, its roof patched with mismatched shingles. The porch sagged when I walked across it, groaning under my weight. Inside were 3 rooms, a kitchen, a living space, and a bedroom. The furniture was sparse, just a table, a few chairs, and a bed frame that looked older than me. I dragged in a mattress from my car, set up my laptop, and called it home. At first, I kept a strict schedule. Wake early, make coffee, write notes, maybe hike a mile down the trail to the creek. No internet, no cable. A whisper of cell signal if I stood out on the porch and held my phone high enough, but that was it. Nights, I read old folklore anthologies by lantern light, chasing scraps of stories about witches, haints, and the dead who wander hollers looking for what was taken from them. The quiet felt medicinal. The first sign of trouble was small. A Friday night, cold enough that frost crusted the windows. I had just finished frying potatoes and eggs when I noticed something out the window. At the edge of the tree line, 20 yards away, a pale shape stood still. It wasn't moving, just upright and narrow. I leaned closer, squinting. At first I thought it was a birch trunk catching moonlight, but there are no birch that deep in the Monongahela. Then the shape slid sideways behind a tree, not deeper into the forest, not retreating, just ducking into cover. As if it knew I was looking. The air drained out of me. I switched off the porch light, backed away from the glass, and grabbed the old hunting knife I kept by the counter. I told myself it could have been a lost hiker, a trick of light. My brain flipped through excuses faster than I could settle on one. But I couldn't shake how deliberate it had looked. That night I checked the locks twice. The deadbolt clicked solid. I tried to focus on a book, but every paragraph blurred. Around 12:30, a new sound broke the silence. 3 gentle taps against the far wall of the cabin. Not banging. Not random. Measured. Tap. 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 I froze. The sound came from behind the bedroom, the side with no porch and no walkway. Just woods. I waited, every muscle locked. It stopped. I don't know how long I sat there before convincing myself it was branches shifting in the wind. But when I finally crawled into bed, my pulse still throbbed in my teeth. The next night, footsteps came. I was half asleep when I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. Slow, deliberate, one after the other. No flashlight beam, no engine shutting off. Just steps. They reached the porch. The boards creaked. 1, 2, 3. Knock. The sound echoed through the cabin, slow and heavy. I sat in the dark, clutching the knife, afraid to breathe. Another knock came, softer, like whoever it was wasn't in any rush. My throat burned as I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. The silence stretched, thick as tar. Then, fabric against wood. Something brushed along the cabin's siding, starting at the far corner and dragging slow toward the bedroom. The sound was faint but steady, like skin or cloth rubbing wood grain. I tracked it in my head, tracing its path until it reached the wall beside me. My breath hitched. Then came the window. I was still staring into the dark when a face pressed against the glass. Skin pale and stretched, almost translucent. Eyes wide, fixed on me. No hair. The mouth slightly open, lips dark and wet, teeth visible just behind them. It didn't blink. It didn't move. Just watched. I locked up so hard inside I couldn't scream. My body simply refused. 15 seconds, or 15 years, passed before it vanished. No retreating steps. No sound of it leaving. Just gone. I stayed on the floor all night, back against the wall, knees hugged to my chest. The lantern sputtered, and I let it die rather than move. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside with the knife in hand, half hoping I'd imagined everything. The clearing looked harmless in the morning light. But beneath the bedroom window, I found it. A white dress. Thin, old-fashioned, like something from the 1920s. Stained with dark brown patches that smelled metallic the second I leaned close. Blood dried stiff. The dress had been laid out neatly, spread flat like it had been displayed for me. No footprints around it. No drag marks. Just the dress. I didn't touch it. I bolted back inside, packed everything I could cram into 2 bags, and threw them into the car. I didn't look back until I was miles down the road. At my parents' house 3 counties over, I called the sheriff's office. Told them the address, the dress, the face in the window. The deputy on the line paused for a long time before saying they'd send someone up. I didn't ask what they found. I didn't want to know. I tried to settle back into normal life, but something followed me. Weeks later, at my parents' house, I woke one night to that same metallic scent seeping through the hall. Copper, blood rust. My bedroom curtains stirred though the window was sealed shut. For a moment I thought I saw a pale face beyond the glass, but when I blinked it was gone. I've since dug deeper into the old folklore I used to study so casually. In Nicholas County, people used to whisper about something called the Bride's Watcher. A story about a woman who died waiting at her window for a groom who never came back from the war. They said she wandered the hollers in her blood-stained dress, pressing her face to cabin windows, searching for someone to watch her the way she once waited. If she left her dress behind, it meant she'd chosen you to take the missing place. I laughed when I first read that, told myself it was just another tale meant to scare children into staying home after dark. But I don't laugh now. I haven't been back to that cabin. I never watched another horror movie either. But sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I swear I hear 3 soft taps against the walls of whatever room I'm in. And I know she hasn't stopped watching. Not yet. I was 31 when I agreed to look after my aunt's cabin near Red Hollow, a forgotten stretch of the Cumberland Plateau, where the ridgelines seem to stack on top of one another until you can't tell one shadowed valley from the next. Aunt Martha had to fly to Phoenix for surgery, and her place was too new to leave empty. She'd moved out there with her second husband just the year before, bought a snug cedar cabin on a hill above a dried-up creek bed. They had 2 coonhounds, Sadie and Boone, who weren't used to kennels. All she needed was someone to feed them, keep the wood stove going, and make sure pipes didn't burst in the cold. I'm a high school history teacher and had just finished grading midterms, so a week in the woods sounded perfect. I figured I could prep lesson plans, read, maybe even enjoy the silence that my little apartment in Nashville never gave me. I hadn't seen the cabin before, and once I left the Tulane highway, I immediately regretted taking my Camry. The access road was rutted and narrow, gravel washed into gullies, tree branches scraping the roof like fingers. By the time I climbed the last rise, dusk had thickened into that dull purple haze Appalachia wears in winter. The cabin was small but well kept, set back against a curtain of oak and pine. The fence around the yard sagged in places, though the hounds bounded toward me as soon as I pulled in. Sadie barked herself hoarse until I scratched behind her ears, while Boone just sat, head cocked, eyes on me like he was making up his mind. I found the key beneath a fake turtle statue by the porch steps. Inside smelled of cedar and wood smoke. The walls were bare logs, unvarnished, and a steep loft ladder led to the sleeping area. Big windows faced the woods without blinds or curtains. Standing there, I realized just how isolated the place was. Not another house, not a single porch light, not even the faint orange of a neighbor's chimney glow, just endless black timber stretching down the ridge. The first nights were uneventful. I'd cook simple dinners, stoke the stove, let the dogs curl near the hearth. The silence pressed against me, but wasn't unpleasant. It was the third night when things shifted. Around 10, while brushing my teeth, Sadie began that low, guttural growl dogs make when they aren't sure whether to attack or hide. I stepped into the living room to find both hounds frozen at the back door, eyes locked on the yard. Boone's hackles stood like needles, though he didn't make a sound. The porch light threw a weak circle into the trees, but beyond that was only blackness and my own reflection on the glass. No wind, no crickets, nothing but a silence so deep I could hear the faint crackle of the stove behind me. Then it came, a whistle. Just one clear, steady note, human, not bird. It came from somewhere beyond the fence line. I switched off the lamp and edged to the door. The yard looked empty, yet I caught the briefest movement. Something slipping behind a tree, fast, deliberate, like it didn't want to be seen. "Hello!" The word slipped out before I thought. Sadie's growl deepened. Boone actually backed away from the glass. I should have left it there, but I pulled on boots and stepped outside with my flashlight. The beam swung across wet leaves and the half-rotted shed. Nothing. Then the whistle again, this time from the left, farther away. I scanned the tree-line, empty. The moment stretched, quiet as stone, until I retreated and bolted the door. That night I took the hounds into the loft. They climbed reluctantly, like they were only doing it because I insisted. I kept the flashlight beside my pillow, heart still buzzing. At some point after 3 I woke without knowing why. Sadie sat rigid, staring at the rafters. Boone had wriggled under the blanket, trembling. Then I heard it, footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Thump, thump, followed by a scraping sound like metal dragged across metal. The chimney, I thought. My throat went dry. Then a voice. Low, steady, right above me, clear as if someone crouched on the shingles. "You got my hat." It wasn't angry. Just factual. A reminder. I lay paralyzed, every hair on my arms stiff. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then came a sudden bang directly over my head, so loud dust sifted from the rafters. That broke me. I bolted down the ladder, dogs scrambling after, and snatched my keys from the counter. My phone still had no service, but I tried it anyway out of desperation. No signal. I yanked open the door and found the porch empty, the yard still. Then another slam from above, so hard it shook the gutter. I ran barefoot to the car, fumbled the keys, cursed, finally got the door open, shoved both dogs in, and started the engine. I didn't dare look back as I tore down that road, tires spitting gravel. I only breathed when the trees thinned, and the first weak bars of service blinked to life on my phone. I got a room at the only motel in Red Hollow, the kind where the clerk passes you a key through a plexiglass slot. She didn't ask questions, just slid me the receipt like she'd heard worse. I sat up all night, TV buzzing low, waiting for dawn. The next morning Aunt Martha called. I told her everything. She was silent a long moment before saying, almost carefully, "We've heard tapping up there. Steps sometimes, but not words." I asked her what the thing meant about a hat. She sighed. "When we moved in, we cleared the crawl space under the cabin. There was an old felt hat in there, filthy but not rotten. We tossed it out with the rest. Maybe we shouldn't have. Her husband once joked that the property had belonged to squatters before the county reclaimed it. Some drifter, maybe even a whole family, living under the floorboards. Folks around Red Hollow whispered about the Creek Man, a shadow figure seen drifting near abandoned homes. Always described as wearing a dark hat pulled low. They said he whistled for his dogs, though no one ever saw the dogs. I never went back to the cabin. Martha still lives there, though she won't stay overnight without her husband. She says sometimes Boone stiffens and stares at the roofline, ears quivering, as though waiting for that slow, sharp whistle to float through the trees again. And here's the part that still unsettles me. Weeks later, while unloading my trunk in Nashville, I noticed something wedged behind the spare tire. A dark, misshapen felt hat, old, caked with dirt. I didn't bring it with me. I didn't pick it up from the cabin, but there it was, waiting, as though it had followed me home. I was 28 when this happened, old enough to think I'd outgrown superstitions, but young enough to still underestimate the kind of fear that lives in the backcountry. I had just started my first year working as a surveyor for a small construction company, and part of my job meant driving out into remote places and getting comfortable with quiet. When my supervisor offered me the use of his uncle's cabin in the Tug Fork Hills of West Virginia for a weekend, I said yes before I even thought about it. My apartment was cramped, the neighbors never slept, and I figured 2 nights in the woods would give me the kind of rest my body had forgotten how to take. The cabin wasn't much to look at when I pulled up late Friday afternoon. The road leading there was little more than a scar of gravel climbing through a ravine, slick with fallen leaves and blind curves. By the time I reached the ridge, the sky had drained itself of light, and the silhouette of the cabin sat hunched against the trees like something waiting. It was a single-story box with tin roofing, no porch light, no mailbox, no real driveway, just a flattened patch of earth pressed down by old tires. 2 hounds greeted me when I opened the car door. One was a pale yellow cur named June, the other a bigger brindle called Jasper. They circled me warily, tails tucked low, as though they hadn't decided if I belonged. I found the key exactly where I'd been told, under a rusted horseshoe nailed to the siding. Inside smelled of pine cleaner and would smoke. The rooms were small, paneled in knotty pine. A heater hummed against the wall, and in the main room a wide window looked directly out into the trees. No curtains, no blinds, nothing but the glass between me and the dark. The first night was uneventful. I ate a sandwich, fed the dogs, and read until my eyes closed. Silence has a weight to it in the woods. It doesn't just surround you, it presses into your chest, makes your heartbeat sound too loud. But I grew up hunting with my father, so the stillness didn't bother me. If anything, I thought it might finally unclutter my head. Saturday passed without trouble. I hiked the old trail behind the cabin, a washed-out logging road choked with weeds and downed branches. The dogs kept close, ears twitching. A crow followed us for a mile, hopping tree to tree and cawing loud enough to feel deliberate, like it wanted me to know it was there. I shook it off as coincidence. Back at the cabin, I grilled some meat on the fire pit and watched the sun bleed away behind the ridgeline. It was close to 10 that night when June stirred first. She lifted her head from the rug, ears rigid. Jasper was slower, but when he rose, his entire body locked stiff. I muted the static-filled radio and listened. At first, nothing. Then the crunch of gravel. Someone was walking up the slope toward the cabin. I stepped to the window and pulled the edge of the curtain aside. The yard was washed in moonlight, pale enough to pick out shapes. At the bottom of the steps stood a figure. A man, or at least built like one, broad shoulders, a cap pulled low, a jacket hanging too loose. His arms hung limp. He didn't move, didn't call out, didn't shift his weight. He just stood there. Then he knocked. For taps, spaced perfectly as though counting. Not loud, not insistent, just deliberate. My throat tightened. I didn't answer. The dogs didn't bark, which was worse than if they had. They only stared at the door, motionless, as though sound itself had been swallowed. After half a minute, the silence thickened. The figure hadn't moved, but when I blinked, he was gone. I opened the door a crack, shotgun in hand. The yard was empty, trees shifting faintly in the wind. I called out, "You need help." My voice sounded too small. No response came. The gravel drive showed deep boot prints leading up, but none leading back. I barely slept. The heater rattled like distant footsteps, and every groan of the cabin felt like breath moving through the walls. By morning I convinced myself it was a hunter, maybe drunk, maybe lost. I made coffee, ignored the unease, and tried to treat the day like normal. But that night, the strangeness returned. It was later this time, almost 11, when Jasper whined low, the sound he only made when he smelled blood. June pressed close to the door, muscles trembling. Then came the voice. "Let me in." Not shouted, not whispered, just flat, clear as though spoken from the other side of the wall. I froze. The words didn't sound tired or desperate or angry. They sounded like the line of a script someone had repeated 1,000 times. I slid to the window, pulling the curtain the width of a finger. The steps were bare. But off to the right, near the propane tank, something shifted. A figure crouched low, its limbs wrong, bent at angles no person bends. Its head turned, but the voice came again, perfectly still. "Let me in." Its mouth hadn't moved. Every nerve screamed at me to kill the lights. Instead, I snapped the motion sensor on. For a blink of a second the flood washed across the yard, and the thing bolted. Not like a man running, not like a deer bounding. It scuttled on all fours, faster than either, hips pitched high, arms crooked too long, head lolling with each stride. The dogs went berserk, howling, pawing at the walls. I slammed the door, shoved the table against it, dragged the couch over too. My hands shook so badly I could hardly keep the shotgun steady. Outside, gravel hissed as though something dragged across it. Then silence. Minutes stretched thin. Then Jasper, still snarling, tilted his head upward. That's when I heard it, scraping on the roof. Nails, claws, something dragging against tin. A slow, deliberate raking, inch by inch. I crept toward the back bedroom. The window there had never opened. Rust had sealed it years ago, the frame warped from damp. But it gaped now, cracked open wide enough for air. My stomach dropped. I forced it shut and jammed the lock. The second the latch clicked, the whisper came again. This time from the vent above my head. "Let me in." It was louder, closer, like breath brushing the nape of my neck. I stumbled back, slammed into the dresser, raised the shotgun. The dogs went frantic, scratching at the walls as though trying to dig their way out. The voice repeated, steady as a metronome, the same words over and over. "Let me in. Let me in." The night stretched endlessly, broken only by that refrain. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I waited until the thin blue of dawn seeped through the blinds. When it did, I dared to look outside. On the glass were scratches. 3 of them, jagged, gouged so deep they had chewed through the outer pane. And muddy prints, smeared up the siding. Prints too large for me, too long in the fingers, palms wide as plates. I didn't pack properly. I grabbed a duffel, leashed the dogs, and drove until the ridge was a blur behind me. I stayed at a co-worker's place that night, claimed I'd gotten spooked by hunters trespassing. They laughed, called me soft. But here's what I didn't tell them. When I stopped at a gas station outside Kermit to fill up, I noticed something in the truck bed. Lying in the corner was a hunting cap. Faded camo. Damp with dew. I hadn't brought it. I hadn't seen it when I packed. I left it there. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, it was gone.